Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Bridget Anderson, the President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Today, we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. And welcome to our Business Resiliency series on navigating COVID-19. Today, we are going to focus on strategies for rebuilding your business and the priorities and risks to consider on your path to recovery. In this time of unprecedented uncertainty, we want to ensure that our members and the broader business community can find their answers to their most pressing questions. Through a series of free webinars, experts will provide guidance and answer questions to help companies navigate the next step. We encourage you to take part in this discussion. You can engage with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by using the hashtag GVBOT. And we're also using Slido for today's discussion, and you can enter your questions at slido.com and use the code GVBOT Recovery. Now, before we start, and especially in these challenging times, we want to thank our long-standing sponsors called our Pillar Partners, and they include TELUS, CN, YVR, BCIT, and Air Canada and Air Canada Cargo. We are very grateful for the support of these 5 organizations whose annual partnerships and commitments allow the important work of the Board of Trade. Thank you as well to our preferred media partner, Business in Vancouver. Now today we are joined by the Regional President of British Columbia for RBC Royal Bank, Martin Thibodeau. Martin leads a team of over 4,000 employees in BC dedicated to providing financial advice and services to over 1.5 million personal, small business, and commercial clients. At RBC, Martin is the co-chair for the Diversity Leadership Council and has headed the Central Aid United Way campaign for financial institutions for many years. Martin, very nice to have you with us. I'm going to hand things over to you for a few remarks, and then we'll get to a Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much, Bridget, and thank you to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade for this opportunity. And thank you to everyone on the line for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us this afternoon. I'm pleased today to talk about, I think, a critical topic, which is strategies for rebuilding business. Maybe some quick context that you've all heard before. We are experiencing something that's unprecedented in terms of challenges. The last 7 weeks have probably felt like 7 years, and they have proven to be nothing short of extraordinary or unprecedented times. And COVID-19 has literally turned the world upside down. We've never seen something of this magnitude before. And what's interesting is we're managing a health crisis at the same time we're managing a financial crisis. And there's not really a playbook or precedent to draw from or playbook to lean on. We've had a lot of other crises in the past, but not something like that. And it's been a wild ride. We've moved now from reacting to the crisis the first maybe 4 to 5 weeks to now have reached something called new normal, adapting to this new environment. And we're now thinking more and more about what is that next normal that, look like, what it might look like going forward. And there's, as you know, plans to reopen the economy. Some provinces and the states have already, reopened their economies. Some provinces in Canada have already announced. In BC, we're waiting, and we have extended the state of emergency and the current measures until May 12th. So it's going to take a bit more time in British Columbia. But that being said, we know we're going to reopen the economy at one point during the month of May, early June. But what does it really mean to reopen the economy? We don't know for sure, and I don't have a crystal ball. Maybe you do, and I'd be curious to hear your insights in that regard. But as we don't have all the answers, the million-dollar question is, how do we make decisions with these uncertain times? How can you make good predictions? And there's no simple solutions to this. And I would say we need to maybe stop planning and start preparing. Planning refers to something, that we know about the data, we have the reporting, we have the future, the demand, the supply, demand. That's less about planning because we don't know There's a lot of variables that we don't know. So shifting our minds to preparing without having all the data, without knowing about the future. And I know it's easy, but that's the work that we've been asked to do. And for SMEs in BC, you need to start thinking about how you will rebuild your business and rethink your business at the same time. For me, there's two important things to keep in mind. Is in any given crisis, there's always a silver lining, both for the business and probably even personally. But let's think about reflecting on what is your silver lining from a business perspective. And any downturns do offer some great time for growth. So these are two elements to think about. As we also move into the future, 3 steps that you would have seen. The first one is the survival mode, the reset, and then thrive. We by the way, we have self-inflicted this recession by managing the our health crisis. So we know that we can self-inflict the recovery. It's just taking the measures to do that. The economy was actually quite strong before COVID-19. So let's maybe quickly talk about those 3 different phases, which is, the first one is to survive this crisis. You have to know your business, inside out, and I'm sure you've taken these steps already. So I won't spend too much time on this one, but it's about cash flows. It's about your balance sheet, your overall financial health. And how is your business doing before COVID-19? That's important to also ask your question. How strong were you before that time? How strong was your balance sheet? And if your balance sheet wasn't as strong, that's also going to impact how you think about the future. But assuming that you were in good shape, that's going to inform you in terms of what's possible and what's less possible. And the other impact or point is some industries have been more impacted than others. Restaurant, service industry, the hospitality business, entertainment, tourism, and so on. Then there's some that have still been in business, kept in business. The construction would be one example. So the measures that you've taken during the survival mode and all the hardship programs, and that probably requires a full-time job, someone to look into all these programs that you have, including reaching your financial institution for any deferral payments that you can make to create the conditions and the working capital that you need to survive during this crisis. The second phase is the reset. And reset doesn't mean to start all over. It's just a chance, an opportunity to really reassess your assumptions and your core beliefs. And asking yourself, what is your competitive advantage? What new opportunities might exist for you to repurpose your business? And I can give you some examples. Either it could be a new partnership. It could be going into takeout for restaurants, and even some casual dining. And I don't think this would have been possible to even think that way 3 months ago. And there are lots of other examples of repurposing. If you're a manufacturing company, to shift your production to something that's more aligned to the demand. One thing that we know for sure is online capability is a must. We're learning that the virtual world is there to stay, and an online presence is an absolutely must, regardless of the industry you're operating in. Some of the measures that we have currently will stay in place for a long period of time. So physical distancing, and they have dramatically changed the traditional, social habits, and people have been more conditioned now to being contained. Another thing to think about is, does it mean that you'll have to abandon some of the things you're doing before, or focus on more on less? And the answer is probably yes. And just thinking about, my business in the banking industry, we focused on one simple aspect, is proactive contact and proactive calling. And of course, serving our clients with our existing branches that are open, but We have more than 50% of our employees that are working remotely to call clients. So proactive contact is really that core thing. Assuming that you're in for the long run is also something you need to keep in mind. And how will you sustain this competitive advantage that you have? And how will you differentiate yourself in this new world post-COVID-19? Then the last one is the thriving part, and that's exciting because you know, it's a phase of growth, and it's around the importance of finding and leveraging that competitive advantage. As you've built your strategy and you're ready to bring it to life, you need to make sure that your offering is also something that opens up the door for cash flow. So that's interesting. That means that you've taken advantage of every possible relief program, of course, that's out there, that you have prepared your worst case scenario, best case, or best or mild case. So you've done all the financial side, and now you're ready to go to market and reopening. But the question I think is that you need to think about as you look at that thriving side is to look at the demand. You might be offering something. Is the demand going to be there? Do your product or service fall into discretionary or non-discretionary income? So disposable income will obviously go, you know, most of the disposable income will go towards non-discretionary at first, like, or will go to discretionary, pardon me. So the rent, the loans, the car loan, and so on. But if you fall into that discretionary spending, how do you make sure that people are still coming to you? How do you stimulate that demand is going to be very important. How do you reach your client knowing that millions of Canadians will reemerge from this crisis with, you know, less money to spend than before? I don't have all the answers, but I think it's our job as entrepreneurs to change the mindset and behaviors or influence that behavior and reprogramming human beings to be kind of social again and invest and spend money when they probably have a bit less. And that could mean, and I'm closing on this, ramping up social media presence, investing in digital marketing, reverting back to traditional marketing potentially, and coming up with new incentives to stimulate that demand. Whatever the solution is, it will require a lot of creativity and thinking outside the box. It's also an opportunity during that thriving phase to learn about what's happening around you, and to be ready to always pivot and adapt as you move forward. Because it's going to be a long journey before we find a vaccine and before everything comes back to that maybe next normal post-COVID-19. And that brings me to the conclusion is we're all practicing or developing a muscle that we probably had before, but we certainly are developing that muscle to the next level, and that's called resiliency. It's probably the one that we're all facing right now. How resilient is your team? How resilient are you to adapt to this changing environment? So, and now it's time to obviously flex that muscle and practice that muscle. So with that, I'll stop. And I don't know, I think I've taken 14 minutes or 10 minutes. So Bridget, it's time for maybe some Q&A and maybe any thoughts you might have.
Martin, thank you so much. And I really like the framework that you laid things out, you know, talking about stop planning and start preparing, and those three phases of survive, reset, and then thrive. And so for those companies now that are in those preparatory phase and they're thinking about what it's like to reopen, whether that's sometime in May or June, as you mentioned, you know, we are hearing from our members that about half of those that we have surveyed are unsure about what that reopening is going to look like, depending upon some of the measures in place. So, for example, if it's a restaurant and it's 100-person capacity and they're only allowed to operate at maybe 30% capacity, is it profitable for them to return? So for those kinds of businesses, and for generally for other businesses that are thinking, well, what are those first steps to reopen? What are some of those priorities that they should have top of mind?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I'll come back to some of the points I've made to make sure that you've taken advantage of any hardship programs that's out there to create or to give you a lot of working capital, because what you just shared is you're going to require a lot more working capital depending on the percentage of, you know, as you reopen, are we going to be reopened at 30%, 50%, 70%? And depending of these you know, these percentages, you're just going to require a bit more working capital to survive and to grow or to move into this next phase. Early indication from other countries is their economies are reopening at 50 to 60%, or 50 to 70 is the range. So preparing for these assumptions, and are you profitable? And then you do want to make the worst case scenario at 30%. Am I able to survive? And or to reopen? And if the answer is no, can you repurpose? Can you leverage the takeout? Can you leverage your online capability? Interesting to see some casual dining that are doing quite well, considering obviously the crisis that we're in. I was in touch with a few of these casual dining, and they would have never thought of having a takeout business before, and now they have, and it's working relatively quite well actually, and enough to cover the cost. So that's some options you have to be able to pivot if you're not going to be able to open face to face, and ultimately you'll have to also look at what if I cannot reopen that way. What else can I be focusing on? And in some cases, hopefully it's just a few of them. It might mean that you're going to abandon, you know, what you're doing and thinking of doing something else if it's not viable, because this is not a short-term crisis. I think it's a crisis that we're going to live. We're going to have to live with COVID-19 for quite some time until we have a definitive a vaccine or remedy to this, and it may be 12 to 18 months. We're hearing all kinds of, you know, speculations, but it's not a 3 months, you know, fix.
Martin, what are some of those pitfalls then as companies are thinking about that recovery phase? What are some things that they should be avoiding?
Well, the first one, I see that a lot. They avoid to keep the line of communication with their bankers. Yes, and I can understand, you know, that during tough times you don't want to share everything. I would say, please share everything. You're a financial institution, and I can speak for RBC, and I'm sure it's the same with the other institutions. They're there to help you. We want to maintain the economy. We want to maintain jobs. We want to help you to succeed and get back, just like the government has the same goal. Either it's the provincial government or the federal government, and of course the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. So we have a vested interest to help, and having that line of communication, open line constantly. That means you're going to have to over pivot maybe at sharing. It's okay. The same with your accountants or your finance team or accounting and legal team. I think with accountants that's probably already in place. But one of the pitfalls is for sure not keeping a close connection with your banker.
You know, that's a really good point, and we'll go to some of the questions on Slido. Is that no bank and no government, and certainly not the business community, wants to see any business fail during this recovery phase. So
no.
Keeping everybody in touch, communicating with your supply chain providers, communicating with bankers, really, really important. And so that addresses that first question then around some common missteps. Is anything else come to mind about a lack of communication, maybe about prioritizing increased debt load and fixed costs? You know, given the supports that have been announced by the levels of government, and they have been quick to try to respond to what some of those needs are, and there are some gaps there still. But in prioritizing some increased costs, what are other things that businesses should have in mind as they're thinking about reopening?
Yeah, and again, as you speak with your banker, being clear or on the worst case scenario, having some good, you know, cash flows in place, some projections. What does it look like? And the bank can also help you to postpone a lot of the payments for a period of time, and also help on focusing on some key points. And let's be ready to take advantage of the programs, but if the programs do not get extended, which we have to be prepared. They probably will be extended, but if they don't, be ready to again lay off some of your sales force. So who's key in your company? And prioritizing does mean that sometimes you can't keep everyone. And who do you absolutely need to keep so you don't lose your competitive advantage? And for example, restaurant, well, we all know the chef is one of your key employees. Not that the others are important, but that's the one that's very important. So you'll have to make sure that's the decision you make early on. And I do see with a lot of cases we support and help, a lot of entrepreneurs sometimes tend to try to keep everyone and everything and focusing on kind of the business as usual before going into the future. So you do have to make some important decisions and important calls. And they're not easy, I grant that. But having, again, a good discussion with your advisors, either it's your banker, your accountants, and your legal team, and I would say other peers. I mean, with your peers in your industry, and many industries have associations. Leverage that too. Tons of good information and best practices to help you make better decisions.
Martin, I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball. And as we're thinking about this second phase and really how long should an organization plan to be in this state of recovery? What would be some guidelines?
Yeah, it's I would say what we know, or not for sure, but what we anticipate, and that's coming from our chief economist. Craig Wright's done a number of conferences or virtual conferences, and we do in general plan to see the economy reopen at a good pace of maybe 60 to 70% by June. I mean, I'm talking the Canadian economy. So some provinces have already started in May, some will wait a bit longer. So a good 6 months horizon is important to me, to plan until the fall. And then I would say that's a short term, but then having a good solid 12 months. As we anticipate that by 12 to 18 months, there will be probably some good news, and we're following the scientific, community very closely. And there was some encouraging news this week. They were sharing a number of things that's happening, and although you can't just base your assumptions on that, it is encouraging to see some progress. But I would say 6 months in the short term and 12 months, and making sure your working capital is strong, and having a longer amortization for your long-term debt is important, because that's going to help to free up cash flow for your working capital. And the BDC program is actually very good. It just came out last week, and depending on the sales level, you have access to $1 million, $3 million, $6 million, and it's amortized over a long period of time, which is going to help for sure to plan that 6 to 12 months, and then be ready for even post-COVID-19.
And certainly we're looking to the health officials to give us some of that science-based information that we'll be looking for around a vaccine or other kinds of remedies that can help address the challenges around COVID-19. But when we're thinking about the signs of economic recovery, what should we be looking for?
Well, signs of economic recovery is when we start to see people coming out of their apartments and homes and start to consume again and start to have more of these habits that they had before. That would be on the demand side, but that would be dictated by the provincial authorities and Dr. Bonney, for example. And that's going to be a big trigger as we start to see some of these measures being released, that will be a good indication to that more that the light is getting brighter at the end of the tunnel. We are seeing it. If you listen to Bonnie, she said, be patient a few more weeks. But that's not a full recovery, obviously. It's more like 50 to 60%. But as we get to reprogram ourselves, I do anticipate that there's a second and a third wave of stimulating that demand, because we program people to stay home for 2 months. Now we have to program people to go out, and because there's fear associated with COVID-19. So people are going to probably try to avoid some of the things they were doing before, and working from home and remotely is probably there to stay for now and for a long period of time. So what are those permanent changes that we see, and how do we reprogram people to reduce that fear and to be back in the market? The good news is there are other countries that we can look and that we are looking into, either it's Sweden or other European countries or Asia, as they were impacted before us, and they have started to reopen their economy before us. We can learn, and I'm staying very connected with anything I can learn from these other countries, so we can share their best practices, because I don't think there's a playbook again for this crisis.
I'm going to combine the first question and the third question here, and you were just starting to talk about it, to address this. So the question is about, should somebody try and restart their business as soon as these restrictions are lifted in the coming weeks, or should they wait and see how the economy is doing? And then also factoring in the possibility of a second wave, potential second wave of the virus. Should businesses holding back and seeing how things are progressing, or should they dive in and try to get things back on track?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bridget. And we've seen, if you just look at Vancouver downtown, there is no restrictions for retailers to be closed. They could be open, but most of them, if you look at Robson Street or Georgia Street or Burrard Street, and everything's closed. So they've decided to close and wait. And so it's definitely an option. But as we start to see the signs of these measures to be released a bit, and we start to see that some specific industries to be allowed to open, and larger groups, and that would be a big trigger. Larger gatherings will definitely help to inform at which speed you can go. So that would be number one. Then your financial situation. You really have to assess also if you go too fast, and let's assume that your financial situation is good, but does it allow you to go at too quick, too fast? Because if there's a second wave, there will be, again, maybe a second wave of financial impact. Can you absorb that? And if your financial situation is very, very strong, well, you can take advantage maybe of the situation and be open and go a bit faster. So you really have to look at yourself and make sure that you surround yourself with your advisors and have and prepare for that reopening.
Thanks very much for that, Martin. And then I like this question around some key strategies to consider when looking towards economic business development. How to be sensitive to those relationships that you have, recognizing that we are all in this together, and that really is not just about Greater Vancouver, it's globally. So what are some strategies that should be top of mind when it comes to the business development side of work?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in a crisis, one thing to consider is be ready to learn and reassess your assumptions on what you were doing before. And as you reassess your core beliefs and you try to learn around yourself, you might decide to actually repurpose your business model. We've seen a number of companies already taking advantage of something that's changed and saying, well, I will abandon this for now. I'm not going to manufacture that product, but I'm going to start doing this one here because that's where the market is. And so one of the strategies to be wide open, to make a significant shift to where you are today, to where you're going. For as long as you know that you're traveling with your competitive advantage, what defines you? Because that's going to be your key success factor. What makes you successful? Could it be applied to other purposes?
So as companies are preparing and looking towards the economic recovery, they're also trying to keep a balance between what's happening on the healthcare side. So what are some of those key factors? I would imagine that we're really following science-based evidence.
Yes, there's a danger there to maybe look at too much at speculation. Always look at experts, and I think we look at our province. We've done a really good job. Our health authority, Dr. Bonnie, and there are other experts, but they're doing a really good job at managing the health side and keeping your information, making sure you have factual information, because there's a lot out there. And I won't share examples. We've heard some from south of the border. Some things that you could do, and obviously that's not recommended. And from the facts that you have, try to adapt your business model. Be ready to pivot. And my advice to all of you on the phone is don't make this as the end state. Be ready to pivot again. And just look at the last 7 weeks, how many times we had to kind of always pivot a bit more. Now we've reached that new normal. But for many weeks, we were adapting either hours of business, laying off people, closing some of our lines of businesses. Like, it was interesting to see how we were constantly moving. There probably will be some of that going forward too. So agility and resiliency is definitely a muscle that we have to keep in the forefront.
Here's a question directly for you, Martin. So what questions should business owners be asking their bankers? Assuming that it's a good relationship, what are banks able to do to support businesses at this time?
Mm-hmm. Well, first question is, to ask, what do they see within the industry? We have thousands and thousands of clients from various industries. So sharing what we hear, and we're very open to share what we are seeing and hearing within the industry. Then, of course, we have also a global perspective, as we have tons of information. So asking to share, your banker will be very open to, certainly at RBC, open to share with you that information. The second question is asking maybe for some feedback. What do they think of the plan that they have? And that not necessarily to think that this is the ultimate feedback, the only feedback you should listen, but test your assumptions with your bankers, as they see so many different businesses in the same industry. And it's a good proxy sometimes to test with your close partners your plan, your plans, your step to prepare to reopen and to grow or to work in the post-COVID-19.
We've got time for a few more questions, and so I'm going to group together the second and the third one because you're talking about industry perspective there. So What are you seeing and hearing? Obviously, a question here about the tourism industry, and obviously that is one that I think has been significantly impacted. So which industries are you seeing that will recover the quickest, and maybe the ones that might be a bit more on the lagging side?
On the positive side, you have the real estate / construction. And I would say construction could even be extended to the LNG and the pipeline. So we've got lots of big projects, and these are going still moving. And so the real estate sector will probably be first to come back from what we see and hear. And it actually didn't stop. The sites are still progressing. Productivity is around 70%, which is good considering the measures that we have in place. On the other side, tourism is a big part of our economy too in British Columbia. I live downtown. I see all these cruise ships coming, and usually they start on April 1st and end in, I think, early November. That's not going to happen for, we think, about 12 months until 2021 for sure. So it's a full season that's out the window from that lens. And you think of the convention center, you think of conferences. So if large gatherings are not going to be possible, people organizing conferences and making also this place as a destination of Vancouver or BC in general, well, it's not going to happen the way it was before. We do see, you know, a lot of British Columbians that will take actually their vacation and will spend time more locally. So focus on that. Leverage the fact that we have a lot of, you know, we have 4.5, let's say 5 million British Columbians that will probably do more of a staycation. How do we make sure that we bring them on our path, knowing that tourism will not be what we saw in pre-COVID-19? Because I don't think that the Americans or the Asians or people from around the world are coming back this summer. So it's a full season that we might and probably will lose. So how do we make sure that we replace it, knowing that it won't probably be as maybe as profitable, but there's still a lot of British Columbians that will take vacation. And I just to make an analogy or to piggyback on this, I just finished an all-employee call with our 4,000 employees, and we all need to take vacation. And no one has planned vacation for the last 2 months. And so we're planning vacation. I'm saying we have to take our vacation. We're not going to monetize vacation. We need it for our mental health, and we need it because it's important to stay balanced. And also, as you plan your vacation, don't wait for the measures to be lifted. Plan, book your vacation, and it's probably going to look more like a local vacation, which is fine. And what can we do? We have. I'm 2 years in the market now. I've moved to BC 2 years ago. We all know it's called beautiful British Columbia. It's one of the nicest provinces we have in the country. I think it's okay to stay around. How do we make sure we capture that demand? You know, all these hundreds of thousands of people to spend time here in British Columbia.
And I think that really aligns with the supporting local businesses as well. And
Absolutely.
so yeah, that'll become very, very important in the coming months. You mentioned earlier on about the need for a digital transformation, that has been incredibly successful for those organizations who can do that. But any advice for businesses who can't adapt to any kind of online or virtual right away? How do they work to recover? And this could be working from home all the way to any e-commerce platform. So what does it look like for those businesses?
Well, if you can't adapt right away, you really have to push yourself to think differently. Like the working remotely is an imperative, and we've proven many different industries. Like our industry, we never thought we could operate a bank from home, and we are serving about 20% of our clients in our branches. So 80% of our business done on the phone right now, and we had the technology, but we didn't have all the equipment. We had to order laptops, and unfortunately, I have some laptops that are arriving today. Imagine, but the good news is we had enough already, so we invested, you know, years ago into having more technology, more online, more remote, and we were ready. But I think that the one to keep in mind that was so quick to adapt, and I have my daughter who's 18 years old, first year at UBC and in engineering. I was flabbergasted at how quickly they were able to pivot to online education. And it didn't happen, it happened over time, but they invested there. And in our education system, if you look at elementary school, they were not as quick, or even high schools as quick to pivot there. I mean, obviously there's other factors that comes to play. How do you become that university, if you will, to shift your business model. And if you can't adapt there, well, then you really have maybe to partner with someone that can help you. Alliances is a way during a crisis to, or venture is a way to maybe get there. So you have to be ready to make some very tough decisions if the current state is just not in play at all. And again, there's lots of companies, and we have a big tech business in Vancouver that can help you, lots of consultants. And the Board of Trade, the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, Bridget, you bring tons of insights and partners. You can connect. I think I see our banking industry and the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade as connectors. We can help clients to connect with the right people.
And certainly we'll have more to say about that in the coming days and weeks. So we have time for one last question. And I really want this question here is if this is our new normal, then what will recovery look like if it's not possible to go back to what it was like just 7 or 8 weeks ago?
Yeah.
That's a tough one. And again, it's a bit of a crystal ball question.
I think we have to be ready. And I'm trying to be as positive as possible, but I think a little bit like other very large crises, and I wasn't there in 1929 for the Depression, but the impact of the Depression wasn't just 6 months or 1 year, it was several years. We just have to agree that that recovery is going to take a long period of time, let alone the maybe mental health impact that we will see out of this. So just as a baseline to say, okay, it's going to take a long period of time. How can I operate despite these challenges? Like I think we're not looking at a V recovery as a more of a long U, if you will. That's a U that's kind of pulled. And potentially with some curves that are going to come up and down along the way. We're looking at Germany that are seeing some resurgences of cases. So you need to be ready for a marathon. And my advice is, if we're going to do a marathon, you have to pace yourself as well, and that's looking after yourself. And something that I haven't talked today, but something I talk to all my employees. We can't be operating, 18, 20 hours a day. That's what we did I was on calls 7 days a week for 5 weeks. I just can't do this forever. So looking after yourself so you can look after your teams and looking at and coaching your teams to do the same, because you won't be able to do this alone. You'll need people. And one factor or one aspect I didn't talk is you need people. You need them to be there and to be creative. But if you're burnt out and if you're exhausted all the time and you're distressed, then you don't have the same mindset. So looking after yourself is a piece of advice I give to all of you, and making sure that your leadership team also take the time to look after themselves. It's going to be a marathon, not a sprint.
That is terrific advice to end this discussion on, Martin. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate your guidance. And again, so you stay well and stay healthy too.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm proud to say this is day 48 of having dinner at home, where I don't have any news. We put music, we cook, we cook dinner together. We eat with my daughter and my wife, and wash the dishes. In my 31-year banking career, I don't remember being home 48 days, straight days. There's a silver lining. And I am grateful that I am healthy, and that is a special moment. I try to be in the present and not worry about the future during the day, and certainly during our dinner time that is precious. And I don't even remember being home for 7 days, straight days. Now it's day 48. So that is a positive, and it's really helping. It's my silver lining. Maybe my wife would disagree with that now after 48 days, but it has been a way for me to keep my my head and my sanity and my focus clear.
Well, that's great. I know that there are some benefits to being close to family as much as we can right now. So thank you, Martin, and stay healthy.
Thank you, Bridget. Stay healthy too.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you. And you can watch this webinar again. You just need to visit the boardoftrade.com on our COVID-19 page, and it will be uploaded in the next couple of hours. And today's very terrific discussion with Martin concludes our Business Resiliency series, Navigating COVID-19. As Martin was talking about, we are moving into a different phase here from survival into reset. And so in the coming days, we'll be launching a new virtual series as we move more into this recovery phase. The first will focus on business reinvention, and then we'll have a business recovery series sponsored by RBC Royal Bank. And to make sure you are notified when we launch the new series, please sign up to our email list at boardoftrade.com/email. Now, we've also created a business resource page designed to provide information and links as the information has become available, and it is all up to date, and we'll continue to update it as more information becomes available to help companies navigate the many challenges associated with COVID-19. Thank you to everyone for being part of today's webinar. We look forward to connecting again soon. And to echo the wise words of Dr. Bonnie Henry, be kind, be calm, be safe.